Welcome to everybody to the latest Q&A with the Science for ME Forum, and this time with Dr. Heidi Nicholl from Emerge Australia, and we'll be talking about their work and the latest news on the establishment of a biobank, registry, and funding for research. So perhaps if I can kick it off to Heidi, if you could perhaps give a brief overview of your background and how you came into being with Emerge Australia.
Yeah, so background-wise, I had I think a somewhat checkered career path. What do they call it? A portfolio career. So I did whistle-stop tours. I originally did a zoology degree at Imperial back in the day. I did bench science for about 10 years, and I ended up doing a PhD in medical ethics. So once I had the PhD in medical ethics, I did lots of teaching medical students, nursing students, and medical professionals. I also started my own business, and I ran a business. So I did both things simultaneously. So I was working sort of 2, 3, 4 days a week teaching ethics, and then I was working, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 days a week running my business. And that took me to various different places. I moved to America, and I was working as a clinical ethicist in San Francisco for a little bit. And then I've always had a relationship with Yale Interdisciplinary Center for Bioethics. And I was there in 2016, at which point I met my Australian partner. Ended up going to Australia to see what it was like, check out the landscape. And I just really enjoyed Australia, still getting on extremely well with my partner. And I started to look for a job, basically. So I was looking to pull together. I didn't want to carry on teaching ethics because I've done that for a long time. Definitely not going back to bench science. And was just looking for a job, and I thought, well, how can I sort of pull these skills in, especially from running a business where my business is back in England and it's got between 10 and 15 staff at any one time. So I kind of looked to see something that could pull that together, found Emerge Australia were advertising for a chief executive officer, and I looked at it, and I remember looking at the advert, looking up and going, oh, ME, oh. And I was like, oh, that's a hard job. Oh yeah, that looks really hard. And I kind of switched it off. And then I kept thinking about it. I have a friend that has been personally affected. And so I knew a little bit about it. And then as I thought more about it, I thought patients are being harmed, and there is a equity issue. There is definitely injustice in the treatment of patients. They don't get equitable access to healthcare. They don't get equitable access to all sorts of things. So it sort of appealed to my ethics sense, with the condition affecting 75-80% women. My background is actually in women's health and child health. So there was a connection there as well, in that I've done ethics, and I've taught ethics across the board in all sorts of with all sorts of different focuses over the years, but I've always come back to women's health and child health as primary issues. So again, that aspect of it, that I'm going to meet lots of women patients and be involved in that sense, was something else that appealed to me. And then I just liked the organisation. I liked the look of the organisation. I liked the things that they did. I liked the fact that there's a membership. I liked the look of the programmes. Obviously, there's sort of health-related support, or doing more support. And I thought that the research was really interesting. So with my research background, I thought, well, actually, medical research from the patient organisation perspective is something that I hadn't really thought of. So I don't want to go back to the bench, as I think I said before, quite clear about that. But being involved in these ways is something that, it all sort of came together. And then I interviewed, and I interviewed on the Tuesday of one week, and on the Wednesday of the following week, I was in Canberra meeting politicians. Mm-hmm. So it moved quite fast, and just got stuck in.
Brilliant. So sounds like it ticked many, many boxes for you then, on a personal level.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's interesting because it is a hard job, and it's definitely not the easy job, but there's been a couple of occasions in my life, especially related to the ethics work that I've done. And I've looked at things a few times and sort of gone, oh gosh, that looks hard, you know, and sort of shut the email or, you know, click the tab closed. And then I've walked around and thought, well, if not me, then who? You know, and if I can't see that there's somebody else that's going to do a better job necessarily, and I think that I can do a good job at it, then just the fact that it's not an easy job is not necessarily going to put me off. And actually, you know, there are so many parts of this job that are absolutely great, particularly meeting patients, patient community, and then getting involved with the researchers. And yeah, there's, you know, so many wonderful people that I get to meet on a daily basis, so it's great.
Brilliant. So you mentioned already that Emerge Australia have got quite a number of programs, or they had a number of programs in place. And are there any that you've started since you joined, or are there any in particular that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, so there weren't too many programs when I actually started. The main thing was that they were maintaining a membership, producing a quarterly journal, updating the website, and there was an info line. So what we've done I've been in post for more than 18 months now. And in that 18 months, we have grown a lot. We managed to get federal funding, which was a big achievement for my team. And that has meant that we were able to professionalize things that had been done, you know, with hope, perhaps with, you know, more hope than resources. So that's been great. So the information line particularly has grown. We now have that staffed all of the time. We also won a grant to get a telehealth nurse and get involved with a telehealth nursing scheme. And that's great because that means that we are really doing direct support. So it's not clinical, surprisingly. She doesn't offer clinical support, but it's case management, and it enables patients to phone up and go through their whole history with the condition, treatments they've tried, when they got diagnosed, or the troubles they've had with being diagnosed, and pull it all together into a sort of coherent narrative. And then the nurse can actually liaise with the patient's healthcare team themselves. So that's great. We now have a volunteer coordinator, volunteer program running really well. I'm sure there'll be lots of people that I miss out. Our research director, Simone, who you know, she's fantastic, and we've been able to reach, you know, make more reaches into the researcher community. We did a research symposium earlier this year, and of course the Biobank, which I know is going to come up more.
Yeah. One particular question that we've had from a forum member is, so is Emerge Australia is basically a national, as the name suggests. Now, obviously, I think in any country there'll be the local groups as well. Is there any kind of relationship between the two? Do you try and support any relationship there?
Okay, so I think, you know, potential political minefield with how, or, you know, lots of different, well, not just from my perspective, but I think in, you know, sort of globally and in the scene of member organisations, etc. So I can talk confidently about Emerge Australia, and the perspective on what Emerge Australia is doing is we have people that will reach out to us from anywhere within Australia. So our mission is, as you say, clues in the title, it's about Australia. So if somebody reaches out to us and says, can you tell me something about XXX in and wherever they are, Tasmania or Northern Territory, or whether it's Victoria, where our office happens to be, then we basically don't see any reason why we'd say, no, right, we're in Melbourne, we're not here for you. So we will answer questions from the whole of Australia. And our programs really, the other big one that we just launched was the GP education. And in terms of GP education, if people are listening to this and they're in Australia and they're like, oh my gosh, why don't I know about this? We actually launched GP education 2 weeks ago, just about 2 weeks ago, and we've given it a soft launch, partnering with an organisation called Think GP, and we haven't made a lot of publicity for patients yet. That's coming, but we actually wanted to see how it performed with just Think GP doing the promotion at first, so there's going to be a big launch on that. But things like GP education, that is obviously, it's Australia-wide. The telehealth nurse, it makes no difference where somebody's phoning our telehealth nurse from. And same with the info line, same with the website. Now, as you say, there are also local organisations in Australia. They are state-based organisations, but they're not in every state, and they do more or less and have more or less funding and have more or less success with what they're doing. From an Emerge Australia, and as I say, many of them are, if not all of them, are absolutely great at doing the things that they do, but that's perhaps what we're doing lies somewhere slightly different. And then I think the other thing that I was going to say is, in terms of delivering things at a state level for Emerge Australia, that's not something that we're really doing at the moment. But we do have a new program that we are going to be bringing on stream with some of our new federal funding, which is about virtual peer support groups. And with virtual peer support groups, the idea is that we will help to support a group of patients or carers with the, related to the condition, that might be 6 people or 8 people, where we will arrange a series of Zoom meetings for them, and then they will have their own little forum that will be sitting somewhere within Emerge Australia, so we'll support that. And that could be because they have a shared interest in photography or film or whatever that thing is, but there's probably going to be quite a bit of state activity there as well. So if it is patients who all live around Brisbane, or patients that all live around, Albury Wodonga or whatever it is, it's all going to sound very foreign to you, isn't it? So if they live in that area and people say, what I'd really like is to find patients that live in the Riverina area, then great. If we have other patients in the Riverina area, then we'll put that together. But sort of that's how my organisation's dealing geographically. I'm sorry, I'm giving you long answers, aren't I? I'm like, I know it's meant to be half hour and you've got all the exciting questions.
No, it's good. It's good. But personally, I think this is another format in which patients can learn about, the activities of everybody that I talk to. So, you've got your fabulous website, which explains all about what you're doing. But, I know personally that sometimes you can look on a website or, read something somewhere else, and it doesn't quite click with you, doesn't quite sink in. So, I'm certainly appreciating the long answers, because it's giving me an insight into the work that you're doing there, and obviously not being a native of Australia, it's an insight for me into how things are in your community, in Australia's patient advocacy community as well. So.
It's
I don't
really
know about anybody else, but I'm finding it interesting. So.
Yeah, and I think something that's very different for us is that people don't realise how big this place is. So Australia is absolutely massive, and there are things that are very different. The state level versus the federal level, and then the fact that there's only 25 million people here compared to in England where you've got 70 million people, and it's very different. One of the examples I'll give for the British people who are interested in politics is I watched the election here for the first time recently, and I usually stay up to watch the election. I'll stay up, I'll give it a pretty good go if I'm in England or whatever. And I stayed up, and it was about 1 a.m, and my partner was like, well, that's pretty much it. And I was like, what do you mean that's pretty much it? Like, where are all the rest of them? And it's like, well, no, there's actually only like 200 MPs or something. And I think, so it's the scale of everything is different, and it's different in different ways. So less people, bigger space, more geography, and the problems here are different in terms of the healthcare and the community services and delivery.
Sure. So we've somewhat teased it on a couple of occasions, but our big reason here is to speak about the Biobank, the big recent news So before we get into detail, I'm wondering if you could give us a bit of background as to how the Biobank funding came about, you know, how Emerge got involved, because I understand from the details released, it's Emerge plus the UK MECFS Biobank, Solve, you know, quite a number of partners who have made up a group who've come together to win this funding.
Yeah, good question. And so the background to what was happening with the Biobank and Registry is that the Mason Foundation are the principal private of philanthropy, or the principal philanthropy fund that has open calls for funding in Australia. There are other private philanthropists, there's a number of other philanthropists and foundations that have made sizable donations to individual research groups, but the Mason Foundation have had an open call for research applications each year for a while. Now, a couple of years ago, they got some consultants in and said, are we doing this in the most impactful way? Is there something better we could be doing? And the answer came back from the consultants that one of the pinch points was finding samples and finding patients for the researchers. So they suggested that establishing a biobank may be a good use of money. So what Mason did was, first of all, they put out, so we as a community, we all knew that the Biobank and the Registry looked very, very likely to happen. And then Mason put the call out for, first of all, there was a call for expressions of interest, and then the individual expressions of interest were then sorted through, and some of the applicants were invited to put in a full application, which is what we did. So from the expression of interest time, the word started zipping around, and one researcher talked to another researcher, and then obviously being the patient organisation, different researchers spoke to us and we spoke to them. And from my own personal point of view, so we'd done the research symposium in March. And from doing the research symposium in March, then we'd had Eliana and Lewis from the London Biobank over. So I'd met them and I'd spoken to them, obviously while knowing that there was going to be a call out for the research over here. And it came together in the way that I was speaking with London to see if they could support the establishment of an Australian biobank, so that we would in some way partner with them. And then Solve MECFS in America, they also got in touch with London to see what was happening with London. London said, oh, we're talking to Emerge Australia. So then we all got involved in the conversation. The way that the application went was, the way that funding has been split from the beginning is, it needs to be there needs to be hypothesis-driven research underpinning the biobank. So there are two aspects to it. There's establishing the biobank and the registry, and then organising the research. So that meant for us, the way that we ended up pitching this thing is that Emerge Australia as a patient organisation. Now, I used to run biobanks, so the bit that I actually skimmed past in my career was part of my bench science job was I ran a biobank in England. So I'm really keen on biobanks. I think I have a reasonable understanding of biobanks. Obviously, that's why I was really keen to speak to Lewis and Eliana. So what we pitched was that the biobank would be established between with the patient organisations, so Solve's input, Emerge Australia being custodian of the biobank, with the London Biobank helping with information sheets, consent forms, nuts and bolts protocols, all of that. And then the scientists is a collaboration of scientists, which is led by Paul Fisher at La Trobe. And they just took control of the hypothesis-driven research and then checked with us on the biobank side that we were comfortable about supplying that material and how we'd be able to make the whole thing work.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So it's early days. Have all the details of how to participate, how, all been worked out
No, no, and it's super early days in the sense that so there was an embargo on the releasing the information. We wanted to release the information properly, which I think we did a really great job in the end. A lot of kudos to Claire Bowers from La Trobe University and Alicia at Equity Trustees. Their press departments did a huge amount of work, and we got a great launch. But because we needed to do the work to get the great launch, so I don't know if you were aware, because a long way away, but we actually got a national newspaper article about the launch of the Biobank featuring a patient story, and then we launched it on our website, and it was this whole sort of coordinated effort. And Paul did 2 radio interviews, I think, and it was a whole piece. Because we wanted to do that properly, we kept the news quiet between when we learned that we'd got the grant funding and between the actual launch. And that meant I couldn't advertise for a biobank coordinator. Right. And without a biobank coordinator, it's actually really hard. So obviously I have other aspects of my day job as much as I'd like to concentrate, and I am concentrating to some extent on the biobank and the registry, that we really need to hire someone. But while the embargo was on, sticking up an advert saying biobank coordinator working at Emerge Australia and La Trobe University might have been a bit of a giveaway. So our job advert only actually went out a few days ago. Had a couple of applicants, had a couple of good leads about applicants as well through the sort of the network. So that's a huge piece of it. We have had our first CI meeting. So Paul and I have sat down with a couple of other people, and there have been lots of meetings, and we're at the really talking. Obviously now we know we've got the funding and we know what we want to do, but it really still is a whole logistical piece of jigsawing everything together.
So that does mean that, well, as I'm sure you can appreciate, many of our questions have been about how patients can take part. So at the moment, there's no point in asking you because it hasn't been worked out.
Feel free to ask me the questions, because then I can say this is either to be ironed out. So, I mean, in answer to the question, how can patients take part? The first answer is, at the moment, we have a mailing list. So if you go to the Emerge Australia website, there is a news article on the website, and that will take you, in that news article, there is a link to a mailing list. So we have already got 450 people plus on that mailing list who have expressed an interest in helping us with the biobank and the registry. That is the first pool that we are dipping into. At the moment, that is the embryonic registry, where if there are research opportunities, we may at least send an email out to that list and tell them. So that's obviously, a registry is about being a matchmaker between the researchers and the participants. So that's the first thing. Beyond that, it's going to be, we will let everybody know how we're going, and as soon as we're open for business, as soon as we're transitioning from that list into the open registry. And I have, I'm sure there are other answers in the general sense that I might know the answer to, so feel free to hear.
Okay. So the question is what samples will be taken? Will it be a blood draw only?
Yes, and it's going to be a decent scale blood draw from what I can tell. So it's going to be, it will be about going to a pathology centre in Australia. For patients who are able to do that, so who are at the moderate end of the spectrum, it will be going to a local pathology centre of some description, don't know which one yet, but obviously Australian Red Cross Blood Services are a big name in on the application. So we're hoping that it will be a case of going to, but then there may be other pathology partners, and there'll be a blood draw. The consent process will be done using our telehealth nurse, almost certainly. So the information sheets and the consent process will be coordinated by the nurse, and then the patient will be directed to their local pathology centre, or will be able to tell us, this is my local pathology centre, can they be pulled into the programme? And in some way, shape or form, all of their data will be put into the registry. which may or may not be both at the same time. So you could elect to be part of the registry on the matchmaking service with researchers, or you could say, I will give you all of this information and allow you to do the pathology and the samples and everything, but I only want my sample to be used in an anonymous way, and that's a one-time donation, and then I'm out.
Okay. Will there be a minimum and maximum age for donations? It's often the case that there is. So
yeah, and so no, probably not. I don't know about the upper age limit, to be honest. That is something that we might look into from the science side of it, and that hasn't been spoke about has blah blah blah. I need some coffee, don't I? I've got a cup of peppermint tea in here and I could have caffeinated it. And it hasn't, an upper age limit is not something that has been spoken about in any of the meetings that I've been in. Now, in terms of the younger age, then I don't think that we are setting a younger age apart from the volumes of blood to make sure that the volumes of blood that can be drawn are usable by the scientists. So to some extent, like, 4 years old, 5 years old wouldn't be able to contribute the blood. I know everyone's sitting there thinking, oh my God, but ethics, she said she was an ethicist. There are also many sort of concerns around whether or not a child would be able to consent for themselves, or whether parental consent, etc., etc. So the hardest bit is the paediatric arm. There is a paediatric arm for the research project. We are partnering with the Murdoch, I try and get the acronym in my head and get it out. So it's the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, which is at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. They are a partner who are one of the collaborators on the grant. So while there isn't a younger age cutoff, it isn't the case that any 12, 15, 16-year-old would be able to contribute. That on the paediatric side of the sample, that will be done through the Murdoch Children's Research Institute with their ethical oversight, and it will be children from that clinic.
Okay. Going back to samples, unless I didn't quite understand it, it does sound as if it will be limited to typically moderate patients.
Good to come back on that. Yeah, because again, that'll be like, what? So I can't do that, and excluding all the bedbound, housebound people. No, so I didn't finish my thought on that. So good pick up. In terms of the severe and very severe patients, we're definitely not going to be excluding them. Part of the pathology services here are that you can get pathology that will go out to people's homes. So there will be more of a cost involved. So it may be that they are not as well represented for a lot of reasons. One is the cost, and two is the prospect of inducing harm on the patients, that we obviously don't want to do that. Now, a lot of patients will say, look, I'm going to use my autonomy and say, I realise that this may incur, there may be some payback on me, but we want to minimise the payback. So if patients are housebound or bedbound and they still want to take part, then we're absolutely interested, and we just need to make sure that we can make that work, and we would find a pathology service. And again, if we really can't find a pathology service at a cost that is manageable in that particular location, then it may be that if you're severely unwell and you live in Alice Springs, or not in Alice Springs, but you live like 300 kilometers outside of Alice Springs, then that may just be, we can't make that happen. But if somebody's housebound, bedbound, and they're anywhere near a metropolitan or regional centre, or they just happen to have a really good pathology nurse that is nearby and they're rural, then absolutely we will be including those people in the biobank and the research.
Okay, brilliant. Will comorbid conditions be a concern?
Well, it'll be a concern, yes. It'll be a concern. Will they be, what does that mean? So that is to be worked out. One of the concerns with comorbid conditions is actually beyond the science, but it's about a lack of anonymity, and it's about the usefulness of those samples. So I can give you the example from the paediatric. So we're starting the paediatric this year. They're one of the first cohorts that will be collected. So I've had perhaps more meetings about that, and that's pressure in my mind. So from an ethical viewpoint, I could explain this relatively relatively simply. So imagine that you've only got 10 samples and you've only got 10 patients. If one of those young people had a comorbid instance of, you know, go way out here and I'll say something like, you know, TB or something, which is going to be like, you're not expecting that to happen, right? So if one of them has TB, it's pretty obvious which sample you're working on. And that means that it would be like the scientists could then know something about that young person that they don't know about themselves, etc. So that's problematic. So there will be an aspect of looking at comorbid conditions in order to look at how anonymity or de-identification would happen. Now, I think that where people would go, well, yeah, but what does that tell me about? I'm actually interested because I have a comorbid condition of fibromyalgia or POTS or perhaps a Lyme diagnosis or some of the things that are more usual, or clinical depression. We know definitely there are people out there that have the clinical depression or something, and they might be on meds for that. So I think if there are enough people that have a known comorbidity or enough people that are on a particular medication, that would be something that we would know about, we would definitely want to know about, and we would want to have those samples marked as this is perhaps a cohort of patients that are moderately unwell, have been diagnosed with POTS, and or maybe taking X medication for that situation. Then that informs the scientists what they're doing. And of course, the scientists could say to us, look, we need people that are on 0 meds. We need people that have no other comorbidities whatsoever. But that's like the whole joy of the biobank, right? We want to, if we can establish enough of a population of tell me about these patients that have POTS but aren't on medication, or POTS but are on medication, then that's great. And the point of the registry is that if the scientists say, we want all of the patients that have this but not that, if we have enough patients in the registry, then we can potentially find them and then ask those patients, particularly if they could donate for research. So that might be, again, I didn't fully answer the question because long answers. You think, how could she not be fully answering a question? Just giving like 15-minute answers. It's just a lot of information on this. So you had said, is it just blood samples? Well, for the biobank, it's just blood samples, but the registry could be anything, right? So if a scientist comes to us, I mean, something's just gone past my eyes about microbiome and fecal matter. Something went past my eyes the other week about, which was muscle snips, but then it was a better way of doing muscle snips. So maybe they didn't actually need the muscle snips. Maybe it was a skin biopsy, and in that sense, the bigger the data that we have, the more information, the more patients that we have on the registry that we can then get in touch with. And, you know, in the registry, there can be data in a registry that is anonymous, but I don't know if we're going to go down that road yet. For my view, I think that it's going to be people that are willing to be recruited into research that want something else. And then the biobank is all the samples where we can go, look, instead of us trying to get all of the same old, sorry, but, you know, all of the usual cohort of patients to keep coming back in over and over again for the blood, we just do one blood draw, organise that all, and the scientists come to us with that research project. We just say, look, we'll just bust out 20 samples, 20, 50, 100, 200, 500 samples, whatever it is that you need, because we already have them in the freezer.
Brilliant. A big question, or big topic at least, is the diagnostic criteria. So there's...
Yeah, we weren't going to bother with that. We just thought...
So a big concern is obviously the whole grey area that tends to exist in medical systems all over. So Australia, UK, worldwide, that a patient will be told that they have ME, and they may, because they've been told that diagnosis, why would they question it? Yeah. So in all good faith, they may come along, they may be participating in the ME patient community, and they come along to give their samples, but if there was a bit of investigation, it might turn out that they would perhaps have something else. So will there be any efforts to perhaps screen for that? Maybe that's the right word.
Okay, so again, on the paediatric, I can tell you how we're going to do that. Don't think that's breaking any confidences. I think I can be pretty confident on that. Like, let me just have a think through in case I'm like, hey, let me tell you all of our secrets. But that's okay. So the bottom line is publish, 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 publish. And that is publish and be transparent about what we're doing and what the criteria are. So the idea is that we will establish what are the set of symptoms that we are using now. And for me, it's pretty obvious that we're going to use the Canadian consensus criteria. We'll be going to be looking at the Institute of Medicine criteria, and we need to make sure that post-exertional malaise is there and to make sure that those basic marks are being hit. So I'm taking that as read, that we are not going, well, you know, Oxford worked in the past, so let's just, you know, look at tired people, fatigue, general fatigue symptoms. Like, I'm taking that as pretty much, you know, we're clearly paying attention to that. So beyond that, what we need to do is we need to say, so yeah, more pertinent for me to some extent is, what does moderate mean, what does severe mean, what does very severe mean? And there's something, so not only the sort of smorgasbord of diagnostic criteria and symptoms, but I think that there's a self-identified as moderate or self-identified as severe, and there's this kind of, well, you know, what do we say? I was doing my NDIS webinar, financial assistance webinars yesterday, and one of the key things on that is, it's not about being more disabled than the next person, it's about meeting the threshold of disability to get into the scheme. Now, when we're doing moderate, severe and very severe, then it is, are you more disabled than the next person? And what does disabled mean in this context, right? So that's where we have to be really, really clear about what we mean about all of those terms and who has been enrolled in and what their symptom profile is. And if I can give an even longer answer, something that came at me, sorry, no, something that came at me from early on in this was about having a single doctor. So there has been something, I think there have been some instances, a lot of instances where research has been done with basically a single clinician in the middle of that process. And that concerns me. It concerns me because we're overly reliant on those clinicians who are, you know, giving the right view or whatever. But we're overly sort of invested in them right now, or what they think now, what they think 5 years ago, what they think, you know, 5 years time, and that they've learned something, whatever. So I see that as a real bottleneck in many ways. So what I would like to have is, I would like to be able to get the symptom array, the diagnosis, who diagnosed you, are these primary symptoms in there? And then any doctor could give their overview. Now, we could also try and enroll those doctors into our GP education. You know, that's what we want to do. Our GP education is all about diagnosis. It's all about, you know, stepwise symptom management, etc. So I just want to try and raise everything up the same way. So let's teach more GPs how to do this. Let's get this spread out, and let's find ways of saying what symptoms the patients have. And then we're not going to say no to people. We're not going to say no because they're self-diagnosed. We might say, do you know what, if you don't have post-exertional malaise and it really sounds from speaking to the telehealth nurse like you're not meeting those marks, then we're not going to take you into this. We're not going to send you to a pathologist. We're not going to bleed you and do all that, because we're just really never going to use those samples. So there will be an aspect of that. But beyond that, people are just not sure on the, you know, who actually diagnosed. It wasn't a specialist, but it was this, but it was that. We'll take all of that into consideration. We've got to think very carefully about how we record that information. Sorry, Andy, you're just like, I'm going to be here till midnight, and you're starting in the morning. It's me that's in the evening.
So you've already mentioned that Paul Fisher is part of the process, and obviously he's already been investigating ME, basically trying to figure it or some aspect of ME out. So he's already got, or he's already used samples from patients. So,
oh yeah, I know this question. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those who've already participated in research, my assumption is that they wouldn't automatically be included because there's no mechanism for that. So really, for anybody who's taken part in previous research in Australia,
Yeah, so if you think about it, the different research groups, so again, it's not just true for Paul Fisher, and I mean, I see what Paul Fisher comes into this because he's part of the Biobank, but there are many research projects. So Griffith University have a pretty constant, consistent recruitment of patients into their research, but that consent process, the protocols that are used, everything is going to be different. So what the whole point of the Biobank and the registry is to try and give some consistency within Australia so that we can say, look, this is how we recommend doing it. This is how we prepare the PBMCs. This is how we do blah, blah, blah. So while everybody has gone through their own ethical approval for recruiting of patients now and doing that, it will still happen to some extent because, of course, that's where the registry comes in. We'll actually be helping people to do that, to have their own ethical approval and to have their own processes. But what we're going to have beyond that is to say, look, perhaps if you're trying to use blah, blah, we already have that in the bank. But no, the fact that you've been involved in research before, or whether it's Paul Fisher or we're also in the collaboration is the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. As I said, there's Macquarie, there's ANU, there's Bio21. Now I've opened myself up to forgetting people, which is a disaster. But whichever of those institutes, no, this will be new.
Okay, brilliant. Well, my next question is, it really comes from a concern from patients that if they were trying to explain their history, then there was concern that it might just simply be a tick box. The examples given are sudden, gradual relapse, remission, the start of their illness. But from your description of how people will be recruited into the biobank, it sounds like there'll be quite a lot of information taken, which isn't just necessarily, was the start of your illness sudden, tick, and that's the end of the conversation there. That there will be more information taken from the patients.
Right. So there's a yes and there's a no. So I think that there is, and I'm going to be completely honest about this, there is a need for tick boxes, right? There's part of that will be tick boxes. Do you describe yourself as sudden onset or gradual onset? And I know from doing our survey, our qualitative survey that we've done, is some people identify as both because you didn't realise when you look back that there was some sort of gradual onset and then suddenly you got unwell, right? So we need to have some aspect where if the researchers come to us and say, I just want the people that had sudden onset, if you've ticked gradual onset or you've ticked both, we don't want you for that. So it actually doesn't matter what your kind of in-depth narrative history is for that. They just want to know, do you identify as the sudden or the gradual? Now, so there is an aspect that we will be crunching things down, and there may be tick box aspects of it, and that's for the biobank. Now, where I would say that real narrative history and the bit about getting the big data comes in, that's why we're partnering with Solve ME/CFS and their symptom tracking app. So I don't know in its current iteration how much there is on that backstory about the narrative of the patient's illness and comorbidities, etc. But we can build things into the app. So the bit where we can gather the data is really through that partnership with Solve ME/CFS. The app is gorgeous. And what that's going to do is it's going to give the aggregate big data about the lived experience of the patient, but there's also the prospect to build in that whole backstory, the whole narrative history for the patients that want to do that and are willing to give that data. Then we can ask that in that way. And that means that the data that then goes through can be aggregate from a biostatistician perspective, whereas the biobank is, and then I guess from the registry, if we then want to say, look, we can see if there's interesting things from this and we want to find those patients with that richer history. But I think there is an aspect for the biobank that will be tick box, but then that will come in elsewhere.
And in regard to the biobank and the registry, just to clarify, essentially somebody can be a part of the biobank or separately a part of the registry, or at the same time a part of both. If somebody is a member of the biobank, is it possible to link their registry details with their biobank samples? Will that facility be there?
That's to be determined.
Okay.
So I have a sense, and I am at the start of this journey, and I'm a little out of date because the last time I was actually running a biobank was horribly long ago, like 14 years or something. So I'm going to look into this more. My sense is that a biobank tends to work with anonymous samples or de-identified samples, and that is partly to protect the researchers. There's a lot of reasons for that. So certainly back in the day when I was doing it in England, all of our samples were completely anonymous, so not just de-ident but completely anonymous. You couldn't kind of get back to the patients at all. So in that sense it wouldn't be linkable. But then with modern technology and whatever, and the people that we're looking at for keeping that information, I think if the patient indicated, hell yeah, keep my information on there, then the scientists can be given it where it's completely anonymous for everything that they're doing. But then there is the possibility, but I don't know. I think it's a grey area for me at the moment, and I think there is many considerations, not just on will the tech do it, but whether it's right to do it from many different stakeholder perspectives. There you go. That was some corporate speak. I told you I didn't have a corporate bone in my body, but I just said stakeholder perspectives.
Well, to perhaps explain a bit more to the patients, while there are many members of our patient community who are very willing to be very open about their experience. Equally, I know through a few of through some of the contact with researchers and with the UK MECFS Biobank in particular, the ethical considerations of it is definitely possible to share too much information because of the potential misuse that unlikely as it could be to happen. Particularly the researchers just have to play so careful with patients' individual information that it's just not. Chances are, even with today's tech, it's just not possible to de-anonymize any lengthy narrative about their condition. To make it ethically correct to link samples with all of that information.
And it's very hard to do your job as a scientist. I mean, I worked for, this is the good one, how many people know ataxia telangiectasia? And for the bonus point, can you spell it? So I was the only staff member working in a lab funded by the Ataxia Telangiectasia Society. Early in my career, and the condition is rare, and a patient would come in and then the samples would be taken, and I can tell you it's a very uncomfortable experience where you know that the sample that you're working on must be from deceased patient that was Mrs. Smith that got taken onto the ward or whatever. It's just uncomfortable. So for the scientists to be able to do their jobs well, there is an aspect of protecting them as well as protecting the patient and everything in the middle, and then of course there are just repercussions where all of the pathology tests and whatever, and if the patient says, oh, I'll give you all my pathology results, there's nothing that you can, oh, you're not going to find anything on me, and then you find something, on whom is the burden of responsibility and that duty of care? Because you can't be putting that onto scientists. That's it's not okay to do that. That's not their job, and that makes it very difficult for them to do their job. So there are just many different sort of pieces on this. So as I said, the fact that it's a hard job doesn't put me off things, and we can work our way through it. We just have to be mindful to do everything in the right way.
Okay. Another quick question: If somebody's samples are used, the question is, will they be able to access any results coming from that? My assumption would be that that's not really going to be possible.
No, and that's something that, yeah, so we say it's very much that it's an altruistic donation, so you're donating in order to help the whole community, and to progress things for healthcare and for patients in general. I think what patients could see is you've made the donation and you will be able to track what's happening with the Biobank. There'll be a website. There's obviously our Research and Media Digest. If you're not signed up for the Research and Media Digest at Emerge Australia, it's fab. Do have a look, and that can be my plug. So the Research and Media Digest will be telling patients what has been published, what research, as far as we can, what research projects are happening, and in that way patients can feel that they're connected to and have contributed in the general sense, but actually being able to say, thank you, Muriel, you helped in, you were patient number 9 on blah, blah, blah. No, that's not going to be possible.
Okay, doke.
But thank you, Muriel.
This question has been asked about the registry, but also applies to the Biobank, I believe. So, who will be able to have access to the information and samples? So, will there be an application process that will take place to gain that access to the information?
Yeah, so there will be a science advisory board that will be established. We already have a pretty good idea of who will be in that, and that's not just the crew that are collaborators on the Biobank project, because that would be great, but it will involve some of those people, and it will involve some different people, perhaps some international people, and so we'll get a crew of people. There will be an application process, and one of the requirements will be that the researchers have ethical approval for their project from their own institution, and then we will look at it through the lens of the Biobank mission and outcomes. So if there is a scarcity of samples, we hope there won't be, but if there is a scarcity of samples, then we have to go through a sort of process of which of these research projects would have. So if somebody comes to us, they might have a fantastic project, but they're going to wipe out everything in the Biobank, or we could support 4, 5 or 10 different projects that are there. That's up to the science advisory group, but certainly there will be some basic standards that have to be in place, being at a recognised research institution, having ethical approval for your project.
Okay, brilliant. And getting to the end, hopefully you won't be too happy about that. So just general questions about essentially how things will work, so particularly with the UK MECFS Biobank and Solve. Are you sharing resources? So you've already mentioned Solve's app. So that's a resource from Solve that obviously will be part of what you yourselves are offering. And I suppose what do the UK MECFS Biobank bring? Had a guess, their expertise, is it, in biobanking?
Exactly, experience and expertise, bit of hand holding, but also we don't want to duplicate anything. That was a very key part of our application. Is I don't want to waste precious resources, whether it's philanthropy dollars or patient blood, and we don't want to do anything that's being done elsewhere before. I don't want to spend the efforts from my team to go through and do a whole consent form and a whole information process. If there's something that's working great somewhere else, then we want to use that. So in that sense, that's how the London School will be collaborating on the project. I think that they're going to be sharing a lot of their resources with us about the protocols, about how they do things, how they do the diagnosis, the symptoms, all of those questions about checkboxes versus narrative, etc. And a lot of the sort of bench science parts of it will be shared by London. And then Solve MECFS is primarily the app, but Sadie Whittaker, who I think you've done the interview with as well, Sadie, experience, expertise, insight, it's just going to be part of the team of driving this thing forwards and making sure that we do it in the best way that we can, that creates impact for patients, and can have a real benefit to people's health outcomes. That was corporate speak as well, wasn't it? Gosh. Andy and I had this joke at the beginning about whether or not I was going to be I'm not corporate, yes.
And finally, I suppose it's more, I'll turn this into more a personal point, because I'm very much of the opinion that, kind of like you were mentioning earlier on about how you're looking to raise up with your GP education program, and how that can actually be part of the biobank efforts to a certain extent, but it works both ways. This project, while obviously wonderful for Australia, for the Australia patient population, it's also seems to me to be a great example of international cooperation that we kind of need more of. And the fact that not only is it building up local to Australia resources and awareness through the publicity of the biobank that you were able to get, it's just raising everything up internationally as well as for Australia nationally as well. And I don't know if you'd agree that is something that we need.
Oh yeah, like stop the duplication. So I think it's really important. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I love Open Medicine Foundation. So with Open Medicine Foundation saying, look, everyone has to collaborate. We can't be over there and having this idea of sort of closed labs or closed resources, where somebody is saying, oh, well, I'm beavering away on this and I'm doing the same thing that you're doing, and I just hope that I get there faster and get the better publication. It's like, oh my gosh, let's not be doing that. So that's a bit of a plug for Open Medicine Foundation. There was their symposium recently, and I'm a great supporter of their work, because they are reducing duplication, supporting good science and supporting collaboration. And we're all about collaboration, and I'm all about not duplicating things. And again, that circles back to one of our first questions about how do we fit in with local groups. Again, let's not be duplicating things. Let's work out where Emerge Australia sits within this, and let's do what we can. I want to do everything that we do. I want to do really well. I don't want to do badly at anything. I don't want to take something on if we're not going to do a good job. It's really, really important to me that we deliver good things on everything that we try and do. And I'd say that Australia is very, very good at the things that we do. We have great researchers over here, and I think that we have a place on the world stage. We have a place within these. I mean, also we planted Chris Armstrong in Open Medicine Foundation. They stole him. So he's one of our great Australian researchers, and he's part of that collaborative team over there. We've got the people in Australia. We're collaborating in this sense with London. We're collaborating with Solve MECFS. I'm open to working with anyone that comes across our door and can help. So it's about leveraging impact. We also I was talking this morning about potentially sharing that GP education that we've developed internationally. So if countries want to have a look at that, we've worked out how much it costs to get it out of the Australian developers, which is not a large amount of money, especially because the Australian dollar is not there again. I think the British pound's taken a bit of a hit recently as well, hasn't it? I'm not sure how we're doing in levelling with each other, but in terms of GP education, if another country wants that and can run that through to get credits in a different country, or just host it somewhere so that GPs can do it and do that promo, why are we not going to do that? It's about impact, and it's about saying we've got something that's great. How can we share that?
Brilliant. And personally, I think that's a perfect point to end, especially as just to reveal to the viewers and listeners. I semi-confidently predicted we might be here half an hour.
Yeah.
And we've comfortably got over an hour now. So, but like I was saying earlier, the longer answers, I personally have really found them, great, really useful. And I'm sorry to have taken up an extra half an hour of your time by getting you to answer them.
Clearly, I love talking about this stuff. So, yeah, I think having the opportunity to talk Biobank and talk Registry and talk about the work that we're doing and things that are exciting, and just trying to create hope for people and trying to improve those health outcomes. It's about getting treatments. It's about curing this. It's about really moving the dial. So, just yeah, I love to talk about it, and I want to see change.
Fantastic. Right, we'll end it there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy.